I think while we're on this topic of fear, we've been talking a lot about these vaccine preventable diseases that are now reemerging, sadly. And as Vivian noted, there's an interplay between the two of vaccine preventable and then emerging infectious diseases. I think your story on Ebola and the halting of vaccination shows that everything's kind of happening at once. So it's not enough that we have to worry about these reemerging infections, but we always have the spectra of emerging infectious diseases and pandemics. And so I would put this out to the group. We've lived through some of this. What's on the horizon now? If you had to sound the alarm, what are you seeing? What would it be in terms of the next major emerging pandemic? What do we think?
I mean, I just want to refer back to something that came up at the beginning of this most recent pandemic, is that the National Security Council at the White House actually created something called the Global Pandemic Playbook in 2016. And there was like a similar documents at HHS and CDC. But that 60-something page book listed all the possible threats. And one of them that was very prominent was novel coronavirus. But it was one amongst many things. And the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which caused COVID, it's not the only novel coronavirus. In the early 2000s, we had SARS-CoV-1, which almost caused the pandemic, had a big outbreak in China and Toronto and a couple other places. But because of public health measures, it got squashed. So it could be a coronavirus, could be another virus, could even be a bacteria.
I would,
Um, and I'll let Stephen and Vivian pontificate more.
when I heard about something like Ebola virus, when I was practicing, it scared me to death. Because there was nothing to do about it, and if it ever got loose in the US, I don't know what would have happened. And you hear this list, as you mentioned, of all these unique and somewhat exotic illnesses. But I swear that the most likely problem for pandemic will be influenza.
Mhm.
Influenza was disastrous in the early part of the 20th century. We are seeing the emergence of bird flu, which is literally one mutation away from being able to go back and forth between humans. And we are woefully unprepared and to either monitor it, identify it, or much less treat it. And we are systematically eliminating the resources we need in the government to either track it, identify it, or treat it.
Well, and Vivian, I'm sorry to jump in again, but
Mhm.
the th thing is, and Stephen made this point, I just want to reiterate it. For most of these viral infections, there is no treatment. I mean, we know that about measles, and until they came up with a couple things for SARS-CoV-2 that caused COVID-19, we didn't have anything to treat that. Treatment of viral illnesses has been very symptomatic and not really targeted to any of the illnesses. We've gotten a few in medical science over the last few years, but for most of them, it's just supportive care at this point still.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with both of you. It's a matter of when versus if. And I think that, Stephen makes a good point. It's likely that we could see another influenza pandemic. It's possible that we could see avian flu, right? The highly pathogenic avian flu. I'll just also comment that, for example, monkeypox, right? Monkeypox, we've known has been in the Congo for some time. However, very recently, about 4 years ago in the US, we saw a monkeypox outbreak in a very specific population. And it somehow was it was more able to transmit via mucosal transmission. And then so we had a huge monkeypox outbreak in our LGBTQ community. And I helped to lead some of those efforts in Phoenix, Arizona. And again, it's a vaccine that really helps to limit the transmission and to end that outbreak. So it was seen in a specific population in Africa, and somehow it made it into a very different population in a very different part of the world, being in high income countries. And so we could think of flu, we could think of avian flu, highly pathogenic avian flu, but we can also think about things that we normally think, oh, it might just be in this other place that's not going to affect where we live. I think something to really remember is, we're a global community, right? We're one plane ride away from something that we think that might be more exotic or foreign or that couldn't come to the places that we live. And that's just completely untrue. And then if you take into account, for example, contagious factor, right? Let's say we got something like flu that became more infectious, like, for example, say like measles, then what would you do in that situation, right? So I think viruses are always one step ahead of us. They seem to be much smarter than us, and we don't have the abilities to really treat it. So I think, it's kind of a lesson for us, right, from the pandemic that we really need to strongly prepare for the next one. And vaccines really are the cornerstone to really prevent the next big pandemic that will occur, I think. So yeah.
Yeah, and that globalization, some of those non-traditional U.S. infectious agents are now present in the U.S. because of changes in the environment. You met Zilka, I can never pronounce it. Chikungunya.
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 Chikungunya, yeah, southern because of warmer climates. But just to put a little bit of rash sunshine in here, one of the challenges of you mentioned, influenza, and we've seen with SARS-CoV-2, COVID virus, is it keeps evolving and mutating. Not all viruses are the same, and fortunately, measles, the old vaccine, still works because the measles virus doesn't really seem to mutate and evolve. I'd liken it to the difference between automobiles and trains. Trains are the same as we've had since the 1950s for the most part. Maybe a little better engines, but the train cars haven't changed all that much. Whereas cars keep evolving. And so when people who don't understand science or vaccinology or biology, they go, why don't we just get a cure for all these viruses? There's all sorts of viruses. It's also analogous like cancer. There's all sorts of different kinds of cancer. You can't just treat it as one, look at it as one thing that we can just science can suddenly solve.
Yeah.
Which is why we need to keep vigilant. And as I said, for things we have vaccines for, we got to keep using them and working on developing new and better ones.
So,
Yeah.
Mike, I like that you mentioned some promising notes. I think that's a good way to start circling up here.